For a closer look at the plan, the price, and the politics, I'm joined by Stewart Elgie. He is a professor of law and economics at the University of Ottawa. And Trudeau says that this plan will return 90% of the revenue right back to Canadians, and many households will be getting more in rebates than the carbon tax will cost them. So I want to play a bit more of what Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, before I ask you a question, had to say about the plan earlier today.
People will be charged more to fill up their vehicles. They will be charged more when they pay for their Sask Power and their Sask Energy bills to heat their homes. With some of that money that is being returned in the form of a rebate. And again, our province asks, if this is the case, what's the point?
So, what do you make of that argument? And, he kind of goes on to say, look, like in provinces like Saskatchewan, and we've heard the same case made in New Brunswick. These are largely rural provinces in many ways. People drive long distances. The winters can be long and cold. So does this rebate make economic sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as an economic expert, I can say that this plan today will have most Canadian households in those 4 provinces coming out ahead economically. On average, by something like $100 a year, and that's on average. It'll differ by province. In Ontario and Manitoba, it'll be more like $50 to $60. In Saskatchewan, it'll be closer to something like $190. And the reason is there's 2 different things happening here. On the one part, every household, every taxpayer is going to get the same rebate check in that province. And they'll also pay the carbon price. So the people who can reduce their carbon emissions the most are actually going to come out ahead in their pocketbook. So people who can do better home insulation, save energy in vehicles or buildings are actually going to come out ahead because you're going to get that same rebate check and it's going to be the same for everyone.
Well, that's interesting. So we do have a Canadian model for carbon pricing in British Columbia. What has the evidence there shown us?
Good question. So we just crunched the numbers, actually, the latest numbers from Stats Canada. BC's had a carbon tax, a significant one, since 2008. During that time, its emissions have been reduced 7% more than the rest of Canada, and its GDP growth has been double the rest of Canada. So with their carbon tax, it outpaced the rest of Canada, both on emission reduction and GDP growth. And there's a bunch of other examples like that around Canada and the world.
So Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says that he's concerned about putting the onus on regular people instead of businesses and big polluters, large emitters. And there were I had a couple of questions on Twitter about that, and here's some of what the opposition leader said.
I don't buy Justin Trudeau's numbers at all. At the end of the day, Canadians know that a measly $12.50 a month will not cover the true cost of this carbon tax. Life is going to get a lot more expensive for hardworking Canadians and families, and large industrial polluters are getting off scot-free.
So what do you make of that criticism, specifically also on the large emitters getting off scot-free?
So 2 things. I mean, the first is it's not really going to reduce emissions, and that's just wrong. I mean, the evidence, not just from BC, but everywhere around the world they brought in carbon pricing, is it works. And it makes intuitive sense, right? If you charge more for something, people use less of it. If that weren't true, economics wouldn't work. So it works. That's kind of a no-brainer. In terms of business and households, I mean, building a low-carbon economy and tackling climate change is going to require effort by all Canadians, both households and businesses. Everyone has to do their part, and this price applies across the whole economy. It applies to households, it applies to businesses. They all face the same carbon price. Businesses, large emitters, are going to get between 80 to 90% of the first 80 to 90% of their emissions they're going to get for free. They're going to have to pay a price on the last 10 to 20%. So they still have all the incentive to reduce because they save that money. But the overall cost is less, and frankly, that helps their competitiveness. It helps jobs. It helps Canadian tax-paying businesses. On the household side, as I said before, the average household in those 4 provinces will probably get more money back through this rebate than they will pay in carbon taxes, on average. So, I mean, there's 2 different things happening. On the one hand, you want businesses and households to pay a price on carbon because that's what drives energy efficiency, innovation, and conservation, which are the changes we need. On the other hand, you don't want it to add to their overall costs. So if they just get a check back for a lump sum, and you pay the carbon price, you can come out ahead economically if you do a little bit more to improve energy efficiency and reduce your carbon emissions.
Well,
It's pretty simple math.
Yeah, another argument, though, just to be devil's advocate here and just put these out there and have you respond to them was, in Saskatchewan, there's the long distances for rural people. There's also, the hockey rinks that will have to pay more, the schools that have to pay more, and that'll all get passed on to just regular, hardworking Canadians.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's true. If you put a price on carbon, all things that involve burning fossil fuels will cost a little bit more. Now, to put it in perspective, you're probably talking about something in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 cents a liter. And if you compare that to the way that gas and oil prices bounce around, it's not crippling. It's going to go up slowly over time, and that's important because it means you can look into the future and say it's not going to be really significant now. But if I look 5 or 10 years out, as the price goes up, it makes sense for me to invest in a more fuel-efficient vehicle, energy efficiency for my house, for a business to invest in carbon reduction. So it's really the fact that this price starts relatively low the first couple of years, but ramps up over 5 to 10 years that sends the longer-term signal that'll change behavior. As for hockey rinks and schools and hospitals, yeah, I mean, they will pay higher fuel prices, but they will also get some of the rebates. Some of this money has been earmarked specifically for those sectors. So, we don't know the details of that particular part of the plan yet, but they have earmarked some of the rebates specifically for the sectors you mentioned.
So other big emitters like China and India, they've also agreed to some climate change plans, but the U.S. recently pulled out of the Paris Accord. So can Canada compete with the U.S. when we have a carbon tax and they don't?
It's a good question. I'd flip it around and say, this is a treaty, the Paris Climate Agreement, that has been signed by every major economy in the world. It's almost unheard of. And the reason they've done it, including China and India and developing countries, is because they can see the writing on the wall that this is a major economic shift that's underway around the world. You just have to look around and see the way in which the cost of solar panels, electric car batteries, dropping by 80% in the last 6 or 7 years and becoming more and more common. These things that were once rare, within 10 years, 15 years, are going to be every day. The world is shifting to a cleaner, low-carbon economy. And the risk for Canada isn't that we get too far ahead. It's that we don't want to fall too far behind in that shift. Now, Donald Trump obviously is not at the leading edge of that shift, and frankly, that's a problem for the U.S. economically, and it's why hundreds of U.S. CEOs from big businesses have urged Donald Trump not to pull out of the Paris Accord and to bring in a price on carbon, because that is the way to drive cost-effective changes towards a low-carbon economy. So I would say it's probably not a great strategy for Canada to be trying to follow Donald Trump's lead on this. We're better to keep our eye on where the rest of the world is going, because that's the economy of the future, and this plan is part of that. The pricing isn't the whole scheme, but it's the most important part of what we need to do to move to a cleaner, smarter economy.
Now, interestingly, the NDP is basically saying the government is not doing enough. Do you think it's possible for Canada to meet the targets set out in the Paris Accord with this plan?
It's a good question. People forget, by the way, that target was first set by Stephen Harper. So those who criticize it as too ambitious from the right probably should remember that it was first set by Harper. So yes, it'll be a stretch. The good news is that we're now moving in the right direction, and I think that's the most important thing. For the first 15 years after we signed the Kyoto Accord, our emissions kept going up. For the last few years, since we've signed this pan-Canadian framework, emissions are starting to go down. And we need to keep moving in that direction, and we need to turn up the dial. But we know how to do this. If you look at BC, it's a great example of an economy that can reduce emissions and keep growth. Same with Ontario. Its emissions are down almost 20% since 2005, and its economy has grown more or less on pace with the rest of the OECD. So we know how to reduce emissions and continue to grow an economy. We just have to keep trying and do more of it. So we've got a good plan. The plan we have will get us about 75 to 80% of the way towards meeting our Paris target. There's going to be another 20 to 25% that we still have to figure out in the next 5 years. That may come through innovation, batteries, home energy, other innovations moving faster than we think. It may have to come from doing a little bit more to manage forests and farmland sustainably. That'll store a lot of carbon. So this is a good plan. We're moving in the right direction. We've got about 20% more to figure out, and we've got 12 years to do it.
Stewart, it was good to get your insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Stewart Elgie, a law and economics professor at the University of Ottawa.